CMHC, Canada's National Housing Agency's latest study shows that progress is being made in building homes. But to fix the affordability crisis, this country will need 3.5 million units than what's planned. Alad Eorwerth is Deputy Chief Economist with CMHC and the lead author for the report, and he joins me now. Alad, nice to have you on.
Good to be with you.
So, there's been lots and lots of coverage in media on the supply shortage. This didn't happen overnight, right? I mean, we could argue that maybe it's exasperated, especially since the pandemic, but you guys were raising concerns well before COVID. How do we get to this point?
Well, as you say, it's taken us many years to get to this point. I think there has been an underappreciation of how important housing supply is, uh, because demand for housing has been going up and up, supply not so much. There has been some recovery in the last few years, but this has been a long-term trend. We've been at it at least a decade of continuing rise in unaffordability.
Do you think one of the reasons for demand greatly outpacing supply is this fascination that Canadians have with home ownership? And I ask this because it seemed like there was this frenzy created during, COVID, and it led to this level of FOMO, as I say, this fear of missing out that we hadn't seen previously.
Well, it's fairly clear analytically in our results that as incomes rise, Canadian households buy more housing in whatever form. Maybe they move from apartments to single detached, they got out of a rental into home ownership. It's a fairly clear trend that income go up. It implies almost directly that housing demand goes up. And I think it goes up disproportionately in places like Toronto, Vancouver, and increasingly Montreal. It just and it's this continuing desire for more space, more single detached. Yes, and there are times when it becomes excessive.
So let's talk about the supply. So you stated in the report that 3.5 million new homes or new units would have to be built by the end of the decade, over and above what's already in the works. And I should probably mention that you're currently projecting something like 18 million units to be built by 2030, but you're saying that's not enough. How did you get to that number, 3.5 million?
Well, the 18 million is what we think the housing stock will be in 2030. And what we try to do is compare that number to what demand is likely to be given likely population growth, given likely income growth, given where we think interest rates are or will be, and what we think an affordable price is in 2030. So we had a lot of parts to go into trying to estimate what demand would be at an affordable price. And then we compared it to that number, as you said, on the housing stock. And that leaves us with a gap of 3.5 million.
So which provinces, Aled, are you seeing the most shortages, and how do you see that changing? Because I know, Ontario, where I am, where you are, much of the population is here, but my understanding is they're also building here.
They're building in Ontario, but they need to build a lot more. So the largest gap is indeed in Ontario. It's
Okay.
where the affordability challenge is greater, particularly in the GTA and surrounding areas. So a lot needs to be built in Ontario, and a lot needs to be built in British Columbia, particularly the Vancouver area, obviously. So those are areas we had long-standing concerns about because of affordability challenges there. But what we're now seeing is increasing challenges in places like Montreal and Quebec more generally. But we're also seeing the increasing demand in Alberta and increasing demand in the Atlantic provinces, particularly Nova Scotia and Halifax. So, as you say, it's a changing picture. There's some places we've always been concerned about, but there are new places now as well.
So can you talk about Alberta quickly? Is that really because of the economic growth that we're seeing there?
Yeah, and that was something new this year. We became a lot more optimistic about economic growth in Alberta. There'll be more disposable income. Maybe people from the rest of Canada will be moving to Alberta because it's become so expensive to live in other parts, Ontario and BC. So demand in Alberta is increasing. Traditionally, Alberta has coped with that, but obviously they need to build more housing to meet that demand.
Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll continue this conversation when we come back. Welcome back. Alan, there's housing and then there's affordable housing. What's affordable? Because that definition I haven't been able to figure out. What's affordable for me is not affordable for somebody else. So can you do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a very confusing notion, and I've almost got to the stage of not using the term, and I start talking
Mhm.
about affordability in the market. And I think that's what a lot of Canadians are concerned about. Clearly, there is a crisis for homelessness, very low
Mhm.
income Canadians and those made vulnerable. And we need more social and affordable housing, which is the term I use in that area, to address concerns in that area because there is a crisis for low income Canadians. So more social and affordable housing for low income Canadians. But the area where I think you're going is in affordability in general. And it's almost at the point that we don't need to be very careful with definitions. We have an affordability problem across the board.
Mhm.
Rental is a problem, home ownership is a problem. And in rental, it's not only affordability that's a problem, it's whether you could even find a place. The
Yeah.
vacancy rates, particularly in Southern Ontario, BC, are just almost zero. So affordability is not even necessarily a concept there because you can't find a place.
So let's talk about some of the challenges because they've discussed labor shortages, they've discussed rising costs, there's red tape. What do you see as the main issues in getting supply up?
In the very short term, I think there is a need for more investment by the private sector in particular, getting more skills. But and this is in the face of the huge need right now and the impact of rising interest rates. So that is a short-term priority. I think longer term, we need to really take a close look at the approval system, fees that are introduced, all of the burdens, financial, red tape, regulatory that are put on new housing construction. It takes a long time to build new housing, and the all of the fees and charges are they're large.
Well, it seems like government leaders are starting to pay attention to this, finally, because it's become a voting issue. Do you see anyone kind of hitting the right policies or trying to do the right things?
Well, I think the government of Ontario has started to act in this area. I mean, I'm not sure I agree with all of the proposals, but it certainly looks as if the government there has taken a close look at the approval systems and trying to reform them. I just think there's a lot more action that's going to be necessary. And it's not just on government to act, but also the construction industry. They need to build stuff faster. They need to, there's just it's hard to get a concise list of what needs to be done. It's just we need across the board change, frankly.
And the other thing, Alan, is the mix of housing. I don't
Mhm.
like. I think that's important, and I say this because, from my experience, not everyone wants a single detached home, right? But
Yeah.
when a family is renting a 600 square foot place, and you can hear your neighbors walk, and there's a pole in the middle, that's a concern. Elderly people don't necessarily even want to stay in their two-story house, but they don't have a lot of options to downsize either. So, are you seeing any kind of concerted effort to make sure they're building the right type of homes?
That's a bit tougher. I think the federal government in particular is really trying to promote more rental supply, and I think that's a very big part of the solution. We have a major problem in the rental system, and I think more supply in that area is clearly needed, and the federal government is acting in that area. I think what you're getting at is another important concern of the right type.
Yeah.
And in this case, if you're in a two-bedroom condo now and your family is growing or you need more space, you have to go into a single detached.
Right.
And that's probably far away and quite expensive.
Yeah.
So that leads to a difficulty. I think another difficulty is the elderly. They should not be, for their own safety, in housing with stairs in them, for example.
Yeah.
But it's important that they remain in their community, but they can't get housing that's suitable for them because multi-unit structures are not allowed in the community because of zoning.